Good afternoon and welcome to this episode of Hemmings Club 54. I'm your host, John Nickus, and I'm here with a distinguished panel of guests. We have Andy Reid, the senior editor for ClassicCars.com Journal, Donald Osborne, the president and CEO of the Audrain Group, which of course includes the wonderful Audrain Motor Museum in Newport, Rhode Island, Wayne Carini, the host of television's Chasing Classic Cars and proprietor of F40 Motorsports in Portland, Connecticut, and Jacqueline Sunseri, the vice president of media revenue and marketing for Hemmings. How are you guys?
Doing good. Excellent.
So this is a really interesting topic, and it's one where we have probably the best array of guests we've ever had. It is how to get into the hobby from a newcomer's perspective. And for most of us, we have had a very long and sometimes checkered past in the collecting car hobby. And we also have one newbie here with Jacqueline, who's kind of getting her feet wet. And so Jacqueline, you're going to provide us that unique perspective. And we're going to start with Wayne, and I'm going to say that you probably have the most experience on this call. It's probably between you and Donald. But when you go back to your time as a teenager, I guess, in Connecticut, really starting out in the hobby, what was your road into it like?
Well, of course, I was brought up by a gentleman, my father, Bob Carini, who was the founder of the Model A Restorers Club of America, as well as a classic car restorer. So I was sort of forced into it a bit, but then I took my own path, and I love Ferraris, I love sports cars, and that's how I got into it really strongly, even though that I was taught very well by my dad to love all cars.
Yeah, and Donald, I know a lot about your background, and I've seen photographs of little Donald Osborne building scale models and looking at car magazines. How did your path start?
Well, it's quite interesting, John. I was born and grew up in New York City, so I did not grow up with cars, the very polar opposite of Wayne's experience as a child. My family didn't buy their first car till I was 12 years old. So I discovered cars through magazines and books. I spent all my time at the library because I had no friends as a kid. And that was my doorway into the world of cars. Once I came in, I never looked back.
And Andy, we're about the same age. What did your path look like?
Well, my dad had all his cool cars before he got married. He had a 300 SL and a birdcage, things like that. By the time I was around, he had Lincolns, which was a terrible way to get into cars. But I had an uncle who was really into cars and had things like a Ghibli and an XKE. And so I got to ride in these cars often because he came over a lot, and he would go, "You want to go for a ride?" And I'd say, "Absolutely." And so we'd ride in his cars, and I kind of learned from him. And then from then on, I just was consuming car magazines by the time I was like 7 or 8 years old. So,
and that's pretty typical. Donald, I guess, and Andy, you both kind of came into this through magazines and through maybe, having seen cars. Wayne, you literally grew up in this, and there are great stories of you going to Hershey, with a sandwich board looking for parts. But Jacqueline, for you, it's a little different. So talk about your path.
Yeah. So I joined Hemmings a couple of years ago. And before that, I had come predominantly from a sports family. So our vehicles were which ones held the most sports equipment that you could get from point A to point B. But coming in and going to the different car shows that I've been able to be a part of, it's really allowed me to look into the vehicles that I personally am interested in. And from talking to different people that attend these shows and why they like the specific vehicles that they do.
So what kind of cars, Jacqueline, speak to you in this kind of relatively brief journey you've had?
So I love the 4x4 space right now. So big Broncos fan. And then I'm really into the Corvettes right now. So my dad actually had an 82 candy apple red Corvette when he was growing up. And so I went to a Good Guy show a couple of months ago and saw a C4, really liked that, started doing a little bit more research and got into the C5 and now that's more the generation that I'm looking at and potentially getting my feet wet into the hobby with.
Okay. So you've got 3 of the world's foremost classic car experts here on this call. Donald, even though your background's in Italian at Ceterini, and actually you're an automotive omnivore, so I think you like everything with wheels, what would you tell her as she embarks on this kind of interlude or this actually fascination with kind of what she talks about?
Well, I think that, Jacqueline, you started in the right way, which is what speaks to you. That's the most important thing at whatever step you are in the collector ladder. And in fact, John, just to correct you slightly, my first car was a Chevrolet Corvair. So I wasn't always into Italian cars, and my tastes are very, very wide ranging, and I think that they have become more wide ranging because of that very point that Jacqueline has brought up. It's the fact that as I gain experience with the cars, I find the things in various cars that speak to me and make me want to learn more about them. I think that her idea of doing research, but first of all, finding the car that elevates your heart rate. That's the first thing. You say, oh, I want to know more about that car. So let me do the research. Let me read the books, read the articles, ask the owners and the people that repair and restore them. That's how you get into it. The best way.
Well, Wayne, you are arguably, the world's most visible and foremost classic car enthusiast. When talking to someone in Jacqueline's position, what is your fundamental, or I guess, ordinal piece of advice?
Well, basically, you want to make sure that you love the car that you own, that you're lusting after. So, I mean, that's one of the biggest things. And then, of course, I like advising people to find something really quirky and unusual, because when you have something like that, everyone will talk to you. So nothing bad to say about Camaros and Mustangs, but when you go to a car show, usually there's 30 or 40 of those each. I want to be the guy that's got the weird and unusual car that people remember, like a Pinto station wagon or a Gremlin or something like that. People will come over and talk to you immediately. They go, oh my God, I remember that car. But they don't do that very often unless they're really into that brand or that mark. When you have a Camaro or a Mustang, they're great cars. I've got both, but I like weird and unusual cars, sort of like my Davis, a 3-wheel car. People really enjoy it. They enjoy the story of it. And that's what turns me on, is just weird and unusual things, as well as all original cars. I just love those.
I don't know how many Davises are out there available, unless she's going to be able to pry one loose from you or Jeff Lane. But, I think that's great advice. And weird and unusual probably, I think, is Andy's middle name. Actually, I think Andy is Andy's middle name. But Andy, what is your advice?
Again, to mimic Donald, buy what you love. I see, it's interesting. I see a lot of people who will call me up and say, well, I want to get involved with classic cars. And I really want a Healy. And my first question is, or I really want a Camaro, or I really want whatever car, insert car here. My first question is, have you driven one? Well, no, but I think they'll be great. You have to drive it before you buy it. I've seen so many people be at an auction, never own a classic car before. They're sitting there, their hands up, and they buy something and go, holy cow, I don't fit in this, or holy cow, this is horrible, or whatever thing. So the first thing, I just wrote a story and about a review of a car. And I said, the first thing that grabs me about a car is the way it looks. And the second thing that I need to know about a car is, do I like the way it fits? Because they're all very, very different. As far as weird and unusual, I'm definitely with Wayne. And there are numerous ways to do that. I mean, to talk to Donald's his first car being a Corvair is a very interesting way into the collector car hobby, with something that you don't see every day. And you go to a Cars and Coffee, you're going to see maybe one other. And hitting in that sweet spot is really interesting. So,
yeah. And Wayne, what about that issue? It's one thing to say, yeah, buy a car that fits and buy a car that you like how it drives, but how do you do that if you don't have access to those cars? And where do you get that access? Does that mean going to a dealer like F40, where you actually have inventory that you can go and visit? How does somebody who's not on the inside get the chance to drive something?
Well, you can certainly look and try to find something that you like right off the bat by going on the internet and looking and saying that a car appeals to me, and then try to find one where you can go sit in it. And we're just talking about fitting in a car. We just took a BMW 850 in today on consignment because the gentleman hates the seat. He can't fit in the car. And with a new car like that, you can't adjust the seat. You can't make it bigger because of the airbag systems in these cars. So we took that car in because he just, and he's only put 700 miles on it. And he says, I just can't take it anymore. But, so fitting in a car, we've had people come to us and say, I love that Testarossa. Well, this guy comes and he's about 7'2". And he, I'm looking at him and I'm looking at the car. And so I said, well, let's go for a drive. So he gets in the car and he bends his and he says, oh, this is really great. I said, really? So we're driving up the street and he's driving like this because he can't fit his head in. He says, I said, what about your head? Oh, I could probably get used to that.
And visit a
And finally,
chiropractor.
in the end, I said, I won't sell you the car because you just don't fit. Let's find your car. And he could fit in a Porsche that we had, and it worked out really well. But you got to see if you fit, if you love the car. And of course, then you got to look at other factors. People sometimes look at the fact, what's it going to be worth? What's its value? Am I going to have an upside on it? And sometimes that doesn't work out.
Well, Don, let's talk about that because you have a sideline, of course, doing automotive, valuations. What do you tell that person whose primary interest, or at least it seems like their primary interest, is making money off their car? What do you tell that person?
I tell them now a very simple story, which is if you go on your dream vacation and it costs you $20,000 for a week somewhere, when you get back home, do you expect your vacation to pay you back? No. You revel in the memories of that vacation, the experiences that you've had. That's how you have to look at buying a car. If you buy a car that you absolutely love, that takes you to the places you want to go, does the things you want to do, that you fit in, if the next day after you buy it, someone's only willing to pay you half of what you paid, it doesn't matter because the car has not changed. You will still get that same thrill and experience out of the car as you did the day you bought it. Now, if you happen to make money on it when you sell it, that's gravy. That's terrific. There are investments to be made in cars, but I would still say invest, open, close quotes, in the car that you love, because that will guarantee you at least something back. If your percentage of increase is not what you expect, you still have the memories.
It's interesting you say that, Wayne. You actually have a great statement that you talk about this. You go to a movie and you watch the movie, and then what do you say?
Well, it's just like, you go to the movie and you see the movie, and when you come out, do they give you your money back? Of course they don't. It's just part of the experience. You enjoyed it, you've had a great time, and it's worth the cost of admission. Another thing I tell people, I say, buy what you love, not what your uncle tells you to buy, not what your neighbor says. Buy what you love, because if the world goes to zero tomorrow and you look out in the garage, you better love that car because it's no longer worth the money that you invested in. So buy what you love, just enjoy it. And to Donald's point too, it's something where we buy cars to do certain events. We'll go out and buy a car to do the Mille Miglia or the London to Brighton rally. There are different cars for different types of events, and you got to look at it, with that in mind too.
So, Donald, let's talk about that point. When we talk about usage, is that something you would maybe ask somebody? Is what do you want to do with this car? Is this a cars and coffee car? Is this a go getting ice cream car? Is this I want to run the Cal Mille or the Colorado Grand in? I mean, is that something you would actively talk about with somebody that came to you for advice?
It's the very first question I ask, John. And it's really interesting, again, that going back to Jacqueline and her experience, she said the vehicles, be careful about cars, the vehicles that she connects most with are 4x4s. Well, that's a natural outgrowth of her experience growing up with vehicles that carried lots of sports equipment. So there's a natural tie right there. And so the question that I ask, and I'm sure that Andy and Wayne ask as well, is how do you want to use the car? If you want to take a car to an international concours d'elegance, then there's a certain car you need to buy. If you want to take a car that you're going to take your family in for ice cream on the weekends, then perhaps matching numbers block doesn't really make a difference because the ice cream store and your kids don't know that the engine is matching. They don't care. It doesn't matter. So buy to your need, not to the point you're making, the neighbor's need, your uncle's need, anybody else's need.
So, Jacqueline, you have identified these cars. Would you know, or do you know at this point where you would go to buy one of these cars that you maybe considered?
That's a great question. So obviously, I've researched some, local dealerships. I'm in Charlotte, North Carolina. So looking, there, also looking on our online auction on Hemmings, and in our classified section, looking in our big book. But really, I'm a big, seeing it in person type of individual. So, that's really important to me. But I know that we've had just really great experiences with people buying vehicles through the auction and being really happy with those.
So Andy, you've owned, gosh, in our age group, probably more cars than anybody I know. How many times have you broken the cardinal rule of never buying a car sight unseen?
Uh, and not from a friend who I knew where it was coming from. 4 or 5 times.
How does that work out typically?
Yeah. Most of the time, it's a huge mistake, especially if I don't get a pre-purchase inspection done by somebody. It can, I bought a Aston Martin a few years back, sight unseen, and I just couldn't find anybody with eyes to lay on it. And $20,000 of repairs later, in a 12-month period, probably. The problem with that is I buy something I think I really love because the way it looks and the way it drives, and then the cost gets so exceptionally high that I find myself every time I look at it, I go, okay, how many dollars are you going to cost me today? And it's not the car's fault; it's my fault for not doing it right. It
So,
doesn't go.
so Wayne, how do you avoid that problem? How do you avoid, and all of us buy cars at auction. All of us, buy cars on Bring a Trailer or on Hemmings, cars and bids. How do you avoid making that mistake from, bad car to good car?
Well, you do your research. You have somebody like Donald go and appraise the vehicle. It's tough to do with Bring a Trailer, for instance. We just sold a car yesterday and Bring a Trailer, and the gentleman that actually purchased it came down yesterday before he made his final bids last night, and he inspected the car, and he spent 3 hours at our business looking at the car, and then went home and bid. So laying your eyes on it is really an important thing, but also dealing with the dealership. So we've sold, since COVID, probably 80% of our cars sight unseen to clients all over the world. And by doing a total inspection, giving them every bit of information, compression checks, all photographs. We do a complete safety check on each car that comes in. And so we lay all that out, that all these things have been taken care of. And it really works out. We have not had a client or a customer that's been unhappy. And it's all because we do our homework and we do it correctly. And I think if you get, purchase a car from a reputable dealer, whether it be through online or Hemmings. Now, Hemmings is a good example. Hemmings doesn't mess around. If you have a bad reputation, you're not able to advertise in Hemmings. So if you have a couple people that have had, some bad cars come out of Hemmings, they close you right out. They're not going to allow you to advertise. So Hemmings is a good source. Our online stuff, Bring a Trailer, has really brought some prices that we've never seen before, and cars and bids. I mean, this new online system seems to be working.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly a difference in buying a car online from, say, Wayne Caridi or Bruce Trenery at Fantasy Junction. These are people that are known quantities, and are going to do that work. And Donald, what role do your friends play when you're purchasing something that you maybe would not have had in the past, or something outside your comfort zone?
Well, just before I answer that question, I just want to add to what Wayne said in that last response. I also advise my clients and friends that any information, any questions you cannot get answered, simply assume it's going to cost you money. It doesn't mean you shouldn't buy the car, but just be prepared. Don't be optimistic because you didn't get an answer about something. Oh, it's going to be okay. You can buy a car that needs $20,000 worth of work or $100,000 worth of work if you're expecting it. It's when you're not expecting, you think you can just get into the car and drive across the country the next day. That's when the disappointment comes in. I think it's about being realistic. We all, I include myself in this, as human beings, want to look on the brightest side possible. This is a thing that I know that is very near and dear to Wayne's life, which is, if we have a contract to come into our house and give us an estimate for work, and they give us a range, it's between 40 and 60. We hear 40. If someone says, well, I'd like to sell your car, what's it worth? Well, it's worth between 40 and 60. We hear 60. So it's a matter of making sure that you also are realistic when you start your search. And in answer to your question, John, I rely greatly on a network of friends and associates that I've built up over the years. I mean, I've known Wayne for, gosh, how long has it been? 30 years? Um, Certainly, Wayne was a very young man. I was always old. It's,
Like
and
my hair was blonde, not white.
exactly. And it's something that to Andy's point about buying a car sight unseen from someone you know. There are also people that you know. I can call Andy up and say, Andy, you saw this car in this place. What do you think of it? I know by his description how he looks at a car. So I know I can make that shortcut, as it were, to understanding what the condition of the car is and how it might meet my needs, which is, again, the thing that we're all talking about and come back to. So I think it's very important as well, in answer to the question about where you get information and how you do that. Jacqueline, for you, when you mentioned you went to the shows, you spoke to owners, talking to owners, hearing the people from whom they've bought cars, people who have serviced their cars, then you've got an idea, to Wayne's point, about who the reliable people are and who the good players are. And that's the most important thing in building your own network of information.
Donald, to your point, which I find very interesting, as I was going around and talking to different car owners, the cars that were maybe a bit more unique, you find that those owners are having a harder time finding people to work on their vehicles. There are less people that are in the trade right now. So that was my big concern is, okay, do I want to get super unique with the vehicle that I'm going to purchase to get into this space? And then when it needs work, I can't find someone to get that done. Or do I go for a vehicle that I really like that maybe has more accessibility for people to be able to get the work done on it that I need to be able to drive it? So how are you guys dealing with that right now in the industry?
Wayne, what do you do if you can't maintain the car yourself? I mean, what about Jacqueline's point? Is that a consideration to make when buying a car? Is who do I get to fix it, or is there someone around that can repair it?
Well, we sometimes when a client comes to us and they say, I'd buy that car, but I got to make sure I can get it serviced where I am. We always reach out to people in that area of the country and say, can you recommend someone that can fix my car? I had a call the other day from a gentleman that bought an F40. It wasn't from us, but someone else. And he says, I have a problem. I can't find anybody in this area to fix my F40. He is then going to be shipping the car to us so that he knows it's repaired properly and maintained properly. And he said, I'd rather do that and pay the shipping costs than to try to bounce around to all these other dealerships and find that nobody knows. That's what's going on in the car world today too, is a lot of the dealerships are into newer cars. So if you bring your F40 to a Ferrari dealer, there's necessarily not the person there that knows how to work on that car. They're a plug and play with the newer Ferraris. So you got to find a proper place to have the car repaired. And we help people out with doing that when we're selling them a car.
Andy, you've had, I guess cars from all over. How have you handled that? And you've also lived everywhere. You've lived on the West Coast, you've lived in the Midwest, and you've lived on the East Coast. Mm-hmm. Is that the first call you make as to who's around to maybe help you with some of these cars?
Yeah. If I'm going to buy something, like when I bought the Aston, I knew I was near a really good Aston Martin dealership. So that was useful. Where I've had other things, Italian things, I've made sure that someone was around. If I couldn't do it, if there was someone in the area to be able to deal with that. There's a couple of times I was going to buy a Lancia Fulvia or an earlier Lancia, and there wasn't a Lancia mechanic in the remote area within 1,000 miles. And I'm thinking, yeah, I know for a fact that unless you know how to work on that car, you don't take it to someone to figure it out because it's quite complex. So I've actually made no decisions saying, yeah, I'm not going to get this right now because of X, Y, and Z. And because I will have to spend $1,000 to ship it each way to get it fixed or become the world expert on Lancias or whatever car it is, which is also a problematic situation. And, I'm just not that good a mechanic. So.
Well, it's interesting, Donald. What about that issue of we want to be different, we want to be unique, but we also want something that, you can take, and get repaired down the street? How do you kind of jumble or juggle those competing interests?
Well, it is a concern. but it can be done. Just as you said, my motto as a collector for my entire collecting career has always been maximum impact for minimal outlay. And Wayne knows that quite well. You know, you show up with the Renault 4 Chevaux and you've got everyone's attention in the world. You know, you show up with one of 4 Bugatti Veyrons, you think, oh, that's the gray and silver Veyron. And the answer is that you can pick cars that are unusual and rare, but not necessarily complex. I've got a 1987 Fiat Panda, and nobody has serviced Fiat Panda. They never sold them here, but it's a modern blacksmith car. It's, you know, if you're going to teach someone basic auto mechanics, you could do it on this car. Nothing's going to go so wrong that somebody can't figure it out. That's not a competent mechanic. Now, having said that, you're absolutely right that there's a big concern right now about the number of competent mechanics who are there to work on classic cars. And I know that people like Wayne and myself and John are big supporters, for instance, of the work they do out at McPherson College, because there are people now in Academy of Art in San Francisco. So there are schools that, even in high school level, that are looking at the career of the mechanic. And mechanic is, you know, was for a very long time thought of in pejorative terms, like, oh, who wants to be a mechanic or a plumber or an electrician? Ha ha ha. Guys who want to, and gals who want to get rich. That's so yeah. It's also our job in being stewards of the hobby to encourage young people to get involved with the mechanics, because it's absolutely key.
So Wayne, you're in Portland, Connecticut. I do want to thank our sponsor, who is also in Connecticut, and that would be Dryce. And they do some wonderful work preparing cars with dry ice and preserving these kind of automobile archaeological artifacts. And we really thank them for their sponsorship and support.
Hi, I'm Scott Ailes. I want to introduce you to automotive dry ice cleaning, or Dryce. Dryce is revolutionizing the way automobiles are preserved and restored. So what is Dryce? So Dryce is a community-led platform. We're able to accomplish things on your cars consistently, no matter what location you go to. If you have an exotic car, a collector car, a pre-war car,
go to drycenation.com to find a provider near you.
Wayne, I want to ask you about something that Donald had talked about earlier, which is getting a car to speak to you. If you don't grow up around cars, or if you're new to cars and you've maybe had just modern cars and you want to get into the classic car hobby, how do you get a car to speak to you, and how do you listen properly to know what it's telling you at the time?
Oh, that's a difficult question.
Yeah, which is why you got it. That way Donald can be thinking, and I know he's going to be.
You know, if a car speaks to you, it basically, you've got to love the looks of a car, and that's so important. I always say, people say, when's the time to sell my car? And I say, well, you go out for a ride, and if you're having a great time, you're smiling, you pull back into the driveway at your home, you park the car, and if on the way to the house, you don't stop halfway and turn around and look at that car and say, damn, I love that car, it's time to sell it. If you just walk in the house and you forget about it, it's time to sell. Cars have that passion, and people have that passion for cars, and you know when the car is the right car for you. And then, of course, the way it drives, and something more important, we haven't talked about this yet, is that the camaraderie of other enthusiasts, like, you know, ourselves, that we all love cars. We love every type of car.
Right.
But there's the enthusiasts. Jacqueline's talking about a Corvette. I mean, the Corvette people are so passionate about their cars. And so if you want to be that type of a person where you're focused on one mark, one type of car, make sure that you like the people that are involved with that mark, because sometimes you buy something and you go, whoa, wait a minute, I didn't know I was jumping into this pool, and I necessarily don't like the people that are involved. So there's lots of different ways of looking at it.
Yeah, and a segue, John, to that is an interesting way to really find out about the car you're interested in is, you know, I always tell people before they buy the car, join the club. and meet the club people. Do a search, and I'm in Connecticut and I'm interested in MGs, the Connecticut MG Club, or I'm interested in the Porsches, join the PCA. What's interesting about it, it does two things. It gives you a number of experts in your area that you can speak with and saying, well, I'm buying my first thing. Can you help me? But it also gives people that great community of the car community like this. And that's the secret reason we're all kind of involved in this. It's not, the cars are just a catalyst for the people you meet within it and the friends you make. And just, you jumpstart that by joining the car club for the car you're interested in. And it's an amazing resource.
Donald, how many car clubs are you a member of?
I am a member of 14 car clubs at the moment, down from a high of 20. And that's just because I did not renew my membership in the Zagato Car Club, although I love Zagato cars, though I no longer owned a Zagato bodied car, so I just felt like such an interloper and I didn't want to be there. But the sense of community, I think, is very important. What Andy said is absolutely key. And what Wayne said, I've heard this so often from people who bought a certain car because they absolutely loved it, and then they went to the club meet and it was like, okay. And it's not being judgmental, which I am, but it's just a matter of, you want this to be exactly, precisely. Which is another reason why I love cars and coffee events. We do 14 cars and coffee events here in and around Newport with the Audrain. And it's amazing to me, to that point of how do you make the connection with a car? Wayne says, there's the immediate aesthetic connection that you make. Wow, that car is beautiful. Or the, oh my God, I've never seen one of those before. And I often find myself going to events like Cars and Coffees and walking around and looking at a car that I can't see a connection for myself with. I'm walking over to the owner who's really enthusiastic about it, saying, why do you love this car? And maybe I'll find out from him or her something I didn't know about the car that makes me want to know more about it. So, keeping an open mind, I think, in the car hobby as well is a great way to also discover those little secrets. Wayne didn't wake up in the morning saying, oh, I must own a Davis. It happened to him. And especially with people who are very wide ranging, I think that's the way we all work.
If that's the case, I would love to have been there next to Wayne when he woke up and said, I want a Spawn.
That particular Spawn.
Exactly.
That must have been one hell of a night the night before. Wayne, what about what Donald just said? What about going to cars and coffee events? What about talking to the owners? What do you think also is the, viability of talking to these guys and saying, hey, can I get in your car? Do you mind if I sit in it? What do you like about it? How effective can that be as a technique?
Well, I think it's really an important thing to use. You can go to any Cars and Coffee across this country. It started off in Irvine, California, but it's just spread all across the country, all across the world. And so you get to, if you're looking to buy a car, that's a great place. It's like a showroom for you, where you can go and talk to so many people about so many different cars. I was at a Cars and Coffee this past Sunday in Windsor, Connecticut, and there was a little bit of everything. And the one car that caught my eye the most was a Studebaker Hawk with a black with turquoise interior. And it was just a gorgeous car. And it's a car that I had not thought of for a while. All of a sudden now I find myself on the internet trying to find one, all because of that. So, and talk to the owner. He bought it in 1961 when it was a 2-year-old car.
Wow.
So, it's that passion that they have for the cars, and it rubs off on you. And I think Cars and Coffee is the best showroom you can go to when you're looking for a car.
Andy, what about when you talk to the enthusiast that is already a collector, but he wants to start expanding his taste? So let's say you collect muscle cars and you want to get into some, full classics, or let's say, you collect 80s or 90s cars and you want to get pre-war. What do you tell someone when they want to go outside of their comfort zone? What is the best advice there?
Meet the owners. If you're at a Concours event or a car show of some sort, talk to the people and get to know the cars and have them tell you about their cars, and then find which one attracts you the most. And, sometimes, car, I never wanted a Studebaker Avanti ever.
Until Dave Kinney spent time with you?
No, until I learned that Ian Fleming had one, which I learned from Dave Kinney. And then I went, huh, that's interesting. And I still don't, it's not still my favorite car, but that connection, that was through meeting an owner who's Dave Kinney, who told me this story about how Fleming had this black one. And so the car that was kind of off my radar got put on my radar because of the story I got from an owner, serial owner, the biggest owner of Avantis on the planet, probably, who told me this story at Amelia one year.
Donald, what about that? Where do you find out these stories? Because sometimes, I think entirely, like, if you like Morgans, one of the things that attracts you most about Morgans is the story about Morgan itself, this kind of Jurassic Park thing. Where does one get stories? Where does one hear these stories?
Well, again, I think that, as we've all said before, you can hear them at events where you can go up and speak with owners. Sometimes at a Concours d'Elegance events, it's a little tougher because not every owner sits with their car all day long. And sometimes you'll see a car and you're dying to ask questions about it and there's no one around, which can be very frustrating. But I come back to my old childhood friend, books. Books are an amazing thing. And the internet has done something which is absolutely astonishing. You can get lots of information on the internet. I'd say that the internet has been the best and worst addition to research that has ever been created, because you can type in a sentence and get a billion answers in a few milliseconds, but most of that is not very useful. But if you use the internet to do the research, to find the original sources and the books, I love books, that's a really great way to get further inside, and also teaches you the questions you need to ask about the cars that you really love. And then you'll find the people that are the experts to answer those questions.
Wayne?
One of the things we haven't spoken about is how important museums are for research and to find these cars. So you can go to the Audrey Museum, which is constantly changing their collections that are there being on display, and you get to know about hot rods. So they have a hot rod, section, and they talk about hot rods, and they have guests come in and speak about these cars. You go up to the main museum and you see some wonderful cars. You see a Tucker, you see a racing Hudson, you see all these different cars in one spot, and you find out everything that you really wanted to get started in it. And then that's what sparks the interest to get you motivated. So the Audrey had a supercar display, which was unbelievable. And it drew so many young people in to look at all these supercars. So museums are very important. Concours are very important to see, but a Cars and Coffee is where you're going to really kick the tires and talk to people.
I found myself getting more invested and interested the more research I did, and looking at the different, very small nuances that these builders would make on some of these models that they were pushing out, and why they did so in some of the documentaries that I was able to watch. Especially when you start getting into like documentaries about like the Mustang and how it started and all of that. So I think that, where Donald and Wayne are coming from here is key on, like, getting involved in the hobby is, what car speaks to you, like, when you physically see it, but which one do you get excited about the more you learn about it and the nuances of that vehicle?
Yeah. And that actually goes to what I was going to say about with Andy. Andy, every week or so, or every few days, you pick a car for, your pick of the day. How do you do that? And how useful is that as a tool for someone who's just kind of perusing the internet to open their eyes to something they might not otherwise think about?
Well, I read them, like, I do 3 or 4 a week, and what I do is I literally hit the site and go through the cars and go and just, sometimes I have an idea in mind, like I want to do a muscle car or whatever else, and so I didn't go browse through muscle cars and go, hey, that's kind of cool, and I just grab it. And then what I do then is I research. If the ad is terrible, oftentimes they are, people don't put enough data. I've got this, like Donald was talking about, this is one of 8 bookshelves in my office that is all car books. And so I pull out the books, and if I don't have the book, I buy the book and I read about it, because the internet is a great resource for 20% accurate information about automobiles, especially older ones. There's a lot of mythology that's been built up about these things that's not always true. But then I just go through it and I go, okay, what makes this cool? Was it ever in a movie? Who owned them? Did it ever race? What's the pedigree there? I always thought Corvette C3s were like stupid cars until I realized what an extensive racing history they had. And then I started looking at period tests about C3 saying, holy cow, these were the fastest cars anybody was building oftentimes in the era at a bargain price. It's fascinating. So I kind of, something I used to make fun of, I started to really seriously pay attention to and become an enthusiast of. It's just the deeper I dig, the more interesting it gets. So
I agree with you. And Jacqueline, I'm going to turn the tables a little bit here. Very few young car enthusiasts are ever going to get the chance to have these kind of experts to ask. So what questions would you ask now that you've got Donald, Wayne, and Andy here? Anything else you want to know?
I think what I would love to ask Wayne is, obviously I'm getting passionate about this. My little one, my son, his favorite movie in the entire world is Cars. At what age is a good age for me to start taking him to these car shows, to getting him to these things, to not push it upon him, but let it be something that he, kind of naturally gravitates towards?
Well, you want to make sure that you take him and he enjoys it or she enjoys it, but yet it's something that you got to make it enjoyable.
Mhm.
So a lot of car shows are very difficult because people don't want you within 20 feet of the car. And you want to go to a car show where you can sit him in a car and have
Yes.
that passion.
Yes.
I fell in love with a 250 short wheelbase when I was 10 years old. We were in the Adirondacks at a hotel, and there was a gentleman that was staying right next door, and he had a 250 short wheelbase, and he asked me if I'd go for a ride with him. So I asked my dad, and he said yes. Well, that was it. That particular car is still my favorite car in the world.
Okay.
So sitting in it, listening to it, starting it, and then of course my grandson is going to be the ultimate car collector. I think for his 5th birthday, I gave him a 1916 Pierce Arrow. So and people say, why did you give it to him at 5 years old? I said, I'd rather give it to him at 5 than try to talk him into it when he's 21. So now he's a true enthusiast about cars because he owns a piece of history.
Yeah, and Donald, how do you build on that? I mean, you are so dedicated to, I guess, increasing automotive education and kind of stoking those passions. How do you look at it from the perspective of the Audrain Group? You have a museum, you have an event. How do you look ahead to that future generation that maybe is Jacqueline's son's age?
Well, I think the key here is, as Wayne and Andy have also been saying, it's access. It's allowing young people to be near the cars, to talk to the owners, to ask any questions they like, to have owners who are in circumstances where they invite people to sit in their cars. I've run into young enthusiasts here in the museum and invited them to sit in the cars, and oftentimes they refuse to do it because they think, oh, there's got to be a trick here, because I've always been told to stay away. And one of the things that I think has always been a part of me, I spent a lot of time in retailing, and I would get very frustrated when I was in a retail environment and parents would say, don't touch. I needed to touch when I was a kid. I think it's more important to teach how to touch. That, yes, you can get in the car and hold onto the steering wheel. It's not going to break the car. Fine. If they make the steering wheel a little sticky, you clean it. Oh my God. And if they step on the seats of a sports car, that's how people got into the car when the car was new. They stepped on the seat and then slid down. Nothing is happening to that car that the makers didn't intend. And it's being gifted to other generations. The most enthusiastic fans of mine that I meet are people who are kids between 5 and 11 years old. It's amazing. And I love meeting them because I see myself at that age, totally consumed by a passion and hopefully not having that passion discouraged. To say it's great to get really excited and ask all the questions and be breathless. That's great. It's not embarrassing. It's fantastic. It's what people want to do.
Andy?
Yeah, on a same note, there's a lot of focus on kids, and that's very, very important. And sometimes the focus on kids is to the point where adults get left out of the newcomer adults, younger people in their 20s, 30s, 40s get left out of it. There are a lot of people coming to the hobby that are in their early 30s who've never sat in a 911 or what insert car, Ferrari, whatever, what have you. Like Donald said, you can't break this stuff. So whenever I have a car, like I had this Rolls Royce press car at Greenwich, and I put everybody that wanted to be in that car, wanted to get in that car, and we went for rides. And it was just because how do you spread the wealth of making people interested in this stuff if they don't get to experience it? And it's Haggerty's youth programs are amazing. They do all kinds of great things with youth people at events, but the 20 to 30 somethings kind of sometimes get left out of this mix, or 40 somethings. I never fail if I'm truly shopping for something. I'm in a Cars and Coffee. I will always say, in Chattanooga this past year, I was looking at a Final Series XJS, and I was talking to this guy and learning about the car. I said, "Can I sit in it?" And he said, "Sure, no problem." And immaculate car. I jump in the car. I'm like, the steering wheel was in my lap. He's like, "Watch this." And I never knew it had. I know these cars. I didn't know it had an adjustable steering column. And he flipped the thing, and now that's on my short list. Where if I hadn't had that experience, I would have made the assumption that I didn't fit in. I would have written it off as Andy doesn't fit in yet another car. On the same token, when I was 11, I was walking to the bus stop, and I got a ride in a Ferrari Daytona. I got the guy. These days, you could put in jail for this. This black Daytona pulls up, and I knew exactly what it was. He goes, "Hey, you want to ride to school?" And I said, "To the bus stop." And I said, "Sure." And so I jump in this stranger's car in my neighborhood, and he takes me to the bus stop. He's like, "Where's your school?" I told him what it was, because that's like 5 miles away. Let's go. And he made the ride the kind of ride when you're 11 years old, you want to get in a Ferrari. And when I was stepping up to my first big car, what was the first one I bought? One of those. And then I did it again because it completely imprinted on my mind that whole experience of doing that. And that is truly important for if you're 11 or 111 to let people do this. And I always get those look but don't even think of touching things, all those stickers we used to see. I always want to peel them off every car I see, unless it's a Duesenberg on the lawn at Pebble, or a 540K on the lawn at Pebble or Villa d'Este. That's silly stuff. I've seen Peter Gleason put people in his cars on the lawn at Pebble, like adults, let alone kids.
Well, I agree. Wayne?
What we've not talked about is young people with 80s and 90s cars now. And this is so important that we recognize what they like and what the up and coming collector cars are. We always thought that, 80s and 90s cars were something, oh my gosh, you just throw them away. But those were the cars that they grew up with. And so you always want the car that you grew up in that era. And so 80s and 90s cars are really coming on strong. And shows like Donald's Concours, for instance, they do a 30 under 30 class. And they bring in, I was watching a video the other night, Donald, where the young gentleman had a 944 Porsche, and he won his class, and he was so enthused. He's got the trophy, and he's driving up to the, off the stand where you handed him the trophy. I mean, this kid was just over the moon. Mm-hmm. And that's what we need. We need more involvement like that. And concours like yours and events like what the Adrian puts on. Andy, up at the museum in Maine, it's a fabulous place. I saw a lot of young people when we were there, and that really is a positive thing. And then of course we have Adrian museum events that we go to, and it's wonderful to see that their Cars and Coffee are over the moon. So,
you really have made a focus of these young timer cars, and that 30 under 30 program. How do you tell someone that it's okay what they like? I mean, because obviously the cars that they like are different than the cars we like, and the cars we like are different than the cars our parents did. It's okay, isn't it?
But see, that's the very point which is so interesting about this whole thing. And in fact, Adrain's doing a new event called Adrain Young Timers. Our first one is coming up on July 17th. And it's not about young people, it's about young cars. Because we realized that a car built in 2002 is now 20 years old. When I first got into the hobby, I mentioned the fact that my first car was a Corvair. It was a 13-year-old used car, but it was an interesting 13-year-old used car. And we're seeing that the basic rules of collecting and collectability apply to cars that were built in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s. I was just driving a 2004 VW R32 this morning, an amazing car, and a very special car that really means something. And it's also a very funny thing with the 30 to 30 and specifically the Porsche 944 class. It was a great example to me of the difference between generational shift, which I'm not a big fan of. I just think that the car collecting universe is expanding at all times. I ordered a 944 when they were brand new in 1982. I canceled my order and bought a Scirocco instead because I could buy a fully equipped Scirocco for the price of the base 944. But it's so interesting to see a car that is as admired and appreciated by 60-year-olds as by 25-year-olds. It's got the dynamic capabilities and properties of the car. It speaks to all those generations, and that's what makes a collector car. So, I think collecting, as we say, collecting moves forward. And we have to keep that in mind and remember that.
I can't believe this time has gone by so fast. Jacqueline, I'm going to ask, first off, what were you going to say?
No, I was just going to say, everyone has brought up this 30s and 40s age group, right? I think that there's a couple of things that are coming into factor with this age group, and I can speak to it, that play into it, right? One, there's so much on social media right now that showcases, the collector car hobby and it being something that's out of a price range for someone to get into, or for you to get involved with it, you have to be at a certain level. Another thing is storage right now, being able to store vehicles and being able to have that. I think that there's like an educational shift that are you interested in a muscle vehicle? Okay. The education of going in and saying, I'm interested in a muscle vehicle. This is my price range. What's available for me here based upon what I'm trying to do, and getting that into this age group is going to help them get more involved within it.
I'm going to give each of you one last chance to say one word of advice to all the people out there that are trying to get into the hobby. And that can be encouragement. It can be a warning. It can be an August piece of advice. But you're going to get one chance to kind of, help these people along. And Andy, we're going to start with you.
Thanks, John. The one thing that has always bitten me when I do it is don't stretch financially in a big way to buy what you're buying. There's always going to be a tax involved after you pay for it for things to fix. So if you stretch really hard financially and buy just at the edge of your finances, where you're right on the razor's edge, it goes horribly wrong.
Donald?
Heart. Follow your heart.
Jacqueline, you're new, but what's your piece of advice?
Mine would be to think about utilization, right? What are you wanting to do with the vehicle? How are you wanting to use it? And let that kind of really drive your decision on, what direction you're going to go.
And Wayne, I'm going to give you the last word, but before you do, I want to get my own little 10 cents in here, which is your British car is going to leak, and that's perfectly okay. And it might not always start. You can buy comfortable shoes. It's part of the process. Wayne?
I don't know what to say after that. Just what Donald said, buy with your heart, but buy what you like. And that's the key to the whole thing. People used to tell me, boy, I can't understand why these young people love these Japanese cars and with all these modifications on them and stuff. I said, that's fine. Let them be, because one of these days, those kids are going to be driving Duesenbergs. They're going to be driving brass cars. Once you start the passion and the love for an automobile, there's no stopping. And there's the key. Get involved early, and then the world is your oyster.
Well-spoken words from a TV icon and automotive legend, Wayne Carini. We've had Donald Osborne, Andy Reid, Jacqueline Sinceri from Hemmings. This has been a fantastic episode of Hemmings Club 54. Thanks to our sponsor, Dryce. It has been fantastic to spend some time talking to you about how you can get into the hobby. All well-spoken guests. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, Don.